Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Leading with Gravitas, Maximising Opportunities Through Change digital event, hosted by the CMI London board. My name is Natasha and I'm an events delivery coordinator at the CMI, and I'll shortly be handing over to Sarah Griffiths to begin today's event. If you have any questions during the digital event, you can ask them using the live chat box to the right of your screen, and we shall answer as many as we can during the Q&A. Today's session is being recorded and will be shared with you later today for those who book to attend, and the event recording will also be available on the CMI website and the CMI YouTube channel. Now over to Sarah Griffiths, Communications and Social Media Lead at the CMI London board, to begin this event.
Hello, I'm Sarah Griffiths and welcome to this CMI digital event, Leading with Gravitas, with Antoinette Dale Henderson. Antoinette is an executive coach and TEDx speaker with over 25 years experience in leadership communications, including 16 years holding senior positions in some of the world's top PR agencies. She's the author of 2 books, Power Up, The Smart Woman's Guide to Unleashing Her Potential, and Leading with Gravitas, which she'll be talking about today. In this keynote, developed especially for CMI, Antoinette will reveal the 6 qualities that people with gravitas share. Drawing on her vast experience, she'll unveil practical techniques to help you create a powerful online presence, plus guidance on how to maximize opportunities as we emerge from the shadows of the pandemic. Please welcome Antoinette.
Thank you very much, Sarah, and it's amazing to be here. Welcome, everybody, and I'm looking forward to getting to know you virtually over the next hour. So the focus of today's talk is leading with gravitas and how you can maximize opportunities for yourself, for your teams, and for your business as we navigate this whole process of change that we're going through. And if you think about it, over the last 18 months, we as individuals, whether we run our own businesses or whether we're part of businesses, have been through more change than anyone else in previous generations since the Second World War. And change it's a constant, it's the only constant, but if anything, it has been accelerating over these past 18 months. If you think about that moment when you realized that nothing would be the same again, when we realized that COVID was going to change everything, it's the same as past generations would have remembered that moment when Kennedy was shot or when the Twin Towers were hit. And so there's been a huge amount of change since that very moment. And if anything, it has accelerated. And so what we're going to look at today is we're going to look at the different forces of change that have been affecting us individually and within our businesses and within the world globally. And then we're going to look at what you can do specifically to make the most of what those opportunities are that come as a result of change. And so let's start by looking at what forces have been shaping our experience of change. And there are 3 different forces that have been accelerating the world and spinning the world faster and faster as a result of COVID. And these are, firstly, there's the environmental change that we've all gone through. So the landscape and the environment that we're all operating has changed and is spinning and is moving faster and faster. Secondly, there's the cultural changes that we're all going through, whether we're part of organizations or part of a sector, that there are truly cultural changes that are affecting us. And then finally, there are personal changes that we have all clearly been through since COVID and as a result of the pandemic. And so depending on what sector you're in and what business you're part of, what organization you're part of, we're going to break it down bit by bit. So we're going to start by the environmental changes. And so firstly, let's look at applying it to one sector that I've had the privilege of working with extensively over the past few months, which is the healthcare and the pharmaceutical sector. If we look at the box on the left-hand side, they've been going through a vast amount of change, acceleration of how medicines are developed from lab to life, from creating some of the vaccines that we are all now receiving, the acceleration of that pace, the regulatory hurdles that the pharmaceutical industry has had to overcome to meet that demand for change. If you think about the way that healthcare is being provided, for anyone who has had a consultation with a healthcare professional over the past 18 months, all of that has been happening remotely, whereas previously we would have been seeing people face to face. And then if you think about the way commercially the landscape has changed, the way that sales is taking place, the way that marketing is being directed at people is evolving and changing. And you can apply that acceleration, the digital change, and the changing commercial landscape to the sector that you are personally operating in, and I'm sure you can relate. So how about from a cultural perspective? So again, within organizations, everything has changed. The norms around how we do things around here and how we communicate with one another has changed completely as a result of remote working. And now, of course, we're moving to people starting to come back into the office, and the advent of hybrid working has changed the way that we can communicate. Things aren't just communicated and implied. Everything has to be explicitly communicated to ensure that everyone receives the same message. If you think about it individually from your own personal perspective, how do you network? How do you get yourself out there? How do you build that social capital? So that's being done in a completely different way as well. And so whereas previously you may have gone along to a CMI networking event and we would all be together in the same room, now it's down to all of us to find ways of networking and creating opportunities to be in front of people in a remote environment. A hugely significant point from a diversity and inclusion perspective is around proximity bias. And what that means is for those people who have chosen to go back into the office and work amongst their colleagues and their contacts, the danger that in that having that proximity, people are going to get rewarded and recognized as a result of what people can see them doing face to face, and the fairness of ensuring that proximity does not become a bias, and that people who aren't showing up in the office aren't rewarded and recognized over and above people who are choosing to work remotely. So that's a huge amount of cultural acceleration and change that we're facing. And then think about it from a personal perspective, both for you individually, but also for the people that you work with. This last 18 months has been a huge period of disconnection. People have felt isolated. It's been difficult for people to increase their visibility. And for those people who are going back into the office and the ones who are staying at home, that fear of missing out, not being part of what's happening back in the real world. Remote working has really blurred the lines between work life and home life. And a lot of the people who I'm working with and coaching at the moment are working longer hours than ever before because it's so difficult to know how to switch off. And all of that has created different levels of anxiety, whether that's social, whether that's separation anxiety, having to be away from people that you have spent so much time with over the past few months. And combined with all of that, the overarching fatigue and overwhelm that individuals are facing as a result of all of this complexity of change. And so this is a huge amount of forces that are spinning the world and making people feel weightless. I've noticed whether I'm coaching or whether I'm running programs with teams and groups of people are to a certain extent feeling discombobulated and detached and trying to find a way through the uncertainty at an environmental level, cultural level, and personal level. And so when people are feeling disconnected, discombobulated, detached, weightless, what do they need? Well, what we need as human beings to to counter those feelings of disconnection and weightlessness is we need to feel grounded. We need to feel like we are connected to something that's bigger than us. We need to feel like we have our feet on the ground. And so how can we, as individuals, but also for our teams and for the organizations that we work with, how can we create that feeling of groundedness? Well, from an environmental perspective, what people are going to need is a really clear vision of the purpose and the direction of where the organization is going. People also need fresh and new and different skills to be able to stay ahead and counter all of those changes that are happening at the environmental level. At a cultural level, what organizations need to create is a sense of culture and a sense of connection that is beyond the four walls of a physical building. So it's about how you create connection in that hybrid environment. People need to feel that sense of belonging. And finally, at that personal level, what do we need as human beings? We need to feel like we have an identity within the organizations we work with. We need to feel like we can continue to be autonomous and forge our own direction. And we also need to feel like we are developing and progressing. And so this is change that's happening and how change has accelerated and how people need to deal with that feeling of weightlessness. And so therefore, what needs to happen from a leadership perspective? This is my perspective and my observations on what leaders need to be delivering for their people at the environmental, cultural, and personal level. Leaders need to be able to communicate a really clear vision. More than ever before, people need to know where they're going, not where they've come from, but what the future holds, and to have that security around that people are going to work together to get towards that vision. People need that sense of connection, and they also need that sense of clarity around what's happening, particularly in that ongoing uncertainty that is part of our reality right now. And so what does that mean in terms of leading through change and what you can do as an individual to be able to deliver against that? Well, part of what I've been working on, not only over the last 18 months, but over the last 15 years or so since I set my business up, is I've been working on the leadership quality of gravitas. And if you think about that sense of weightlessness, that sense of disconnection and discombobulation that people, organizations, and teams are feeling as a result of the pace and the acceleration of change, what people need is they need to have leaders who have that sense of gravitas, who can demonstrate that quality. So what is gravitas? Gravitas is the ability to command respect, get taken seriously, and stand out from the crowd, all by being your own authentic self. Gravitas is important in times of change because what we need from our leaders is we need people who are going to be there, people who are going to be strong and solid and calm, people who have gravitas. And so since deciding, and many years ago now, that I was going to look at decoding gravitas and turning it into a quality that could be learned and accelerated in humans, I decided to create a model which would decode it and turn it into a quality that could be learned and developed. And that I then went out, when I decided that I was going to do that, I went out and I conducted research with leaders from all different walks of life and looked at what qualities do those leaders have in common? How do they communicate? How do they show up? How do they show themselves within their organizations and within their sectors? And as a result of conducting that research, I created a model. And in the past 8 months or so, I have updated the first edition of Leading with Gravitas and created the second edition, which is here. It's one of the things that kept me busy during lockdown. And what this includes is it includes a whole load of new guidance around remote communication, because that will continue to be a reality, particularly for people who work in a global environment, but for everyone who's working in a hybrid environment, that remote communication is going to be just as important as ever before. And there's also a whole new chapter around how do you lead through change and how do you use your gravitas to lead through change. And so let's have a look at what this word gravitas means. I've already started to talk about, well, what does it give you? It enables you to command respect, get taken seriously, and stand out from the crowd. But let's break down gravitas in a bit more detail. When I decided I was going to decode it, I looked at the word itself, and I realized that word gravitas, it's a Latin word originally, but it's actually got two different components to it. The first component of that word gravitas is the word gravis. And can you hear when I say gravis, my voice naturally goes down. It becomes more grounded. And the word gravis means weight. And what I'd like you to do, or to invite you to do, is to imagine the weight of your body as it's going through your body and down into the soles of your feet, and experience how the weight of your body and how you are connected to the earth. This is a really powerful exercise if you're going through one of those periods where you're feeling disconnected, discombobulated, weightless. That gravis will help ground you, which means that you will be more able to communicate with confidence in those situations where you need to, but also handle it if you encounter forces that are threatening to knock you off course. So that's just the first part of gravitas, that word gravis. The second part of the word gravitas is the word vita. And the word vita means life. And can you hear how when I'm using that word life, it creates a different energy in my voice? And the interesting thing is that when we're going through change and when we're going through periods of overwhelm or stress, or that sense of feeling disconnected, we can sometimes become disconnected from ourselves. We can become disconnected from our own life force. And so purely by connecting with that word vita and what that means to you, your energy, your life force, your way of doing things, by coming back to that again is what is going to enable you to give you strength to power through even the most challenging times. So just the word itself is incredibly powerful, and the words come back to when you're thinking about how you can maximize on opportunities and handle challenges that come as a result of change. But of course, I went beyond the word. You can't have a whole book that's just got one word in it. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to share with you the gravitas wheel that I developed. And this has become hugely popular with individuals, but also teams and whole organizations, to enable them to assess and then focus on developing the 6 different components of gravitas, which I'm going to share with you now. And so the gravitas wheel looks like this. There are 6 different parts of gravitas, which I identified as a result of my research. 3 different components here on the right-hand side are internal, and they are self-awareness, expertise, and authenticity. And then there are 3 different components which are external, and this is what enables you to take your gravitas and communicate it to the outside world. And so those external components of gravitas are presence, connection, and projection. And then at the heart of the wheel, at the center of the wheel, is that sense of purpose. If you remember what I said about what leaders need to be able to demonstrate during change, leaders need to be able to communicate a sense of purpose and a sense of vision of where we are going and how we're going to get there. Because what I realized with all leaders with gravitas, and there are many, many, many different forms, is that the one thing that they do have in common is that they do share the fact that they have a sense of purpose that is bigger than them and part of the wider world and the wider community. It's not just about how they're going to accelerate their own progression. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you through the 6 different components in a bit more detail. And you could, if you like, you can go through this wheel and assess yourself. You can see we've got 10 concentric circles going from the inside to the outside. So you can rate yourself on a scale of 1 to 10 against each of these 6 different components and figure out where your strengths are, most importantly, but also those qualities that you might want to develop further to enhance your gravitas even more. Another thing that people find useful when they're completing this wheel is thinking about a specific goal that they have. So you can think about a goal that you have for yourself individually, or you can think about a goal for the team that you're part of, or you can even think about a wider goal for your organization and assess your individual team or organization's gravitas on that basis. So let's make a start. I'm going to take you through these 3 different components one by one. Then I'm going to have a short break, hand back to Sarah, who's going to take me through some questions that will have come in. And then I'll take you through the 3 external components of the gravitas wheel with some time at the end for further questions. So let's start with self-awareness. Now, self-awareness is really the foundation of any self-development, any progression, and certainly self-awareness is a key part of gravitas. And so self-awareness is an interesting thing to come back to during change, because who you were even 6 months ago, 12 months ago, 18 months ago, who you were is not the same as who you are now, particularly with all these ongoing changes. And so it's important to continue to reflect. Classic business tool, use a SWOT to reflect on what your strengths and weaknesses are in relation to the changes that you're going through. What opportunities and threats that are out there. There are huge, I hate to say it, but there are huge threats that many of us are facing with the organizational changes that are going through. We could perceive them as such, with redundancies happening, massive organizational reorganizations, and vast changes when it comes from a digital perspective to how we actually conduct our business. And so it's worth thinking about what strengths you have, but also what you need to do to upskill and make yourself as current as you possibly can, given the changes that are ahead. Self-awareness is also a key part of emotional intelligence. And again, emotional intelligence is the key quality that will enable you to be flexible and handle change. And ultimately, when it comes to change, the person who has the greatest influence is the person who has the greatest flexibility. So emotional intelligence is absolutely where it's at. EQ is what will also enable you to work out what happens to you when you're feeling under pressure. See this scale down here at the bottom here that I've developed? We'll all go somewhere on this scale when we're in fight or flight, when we feel discombobulated or we feel like we've been knocked off course. We'll either become really passive, so we'll stop talking, or we might become quite self-deprecating and talk about, minimize what we bring, the strengths that we bring. Or we might go the other end of the extreme and perhaps become quite aggressive when we're under threat, or quite arrogant. Ultimately, what we want to be able to do is communicate assertively. And self-awareness will help you understand where you go and also what you need to do to stay assertive. So that's self-awareness. We're going to move on to expertise now. And expertise, so I've got a picture here of a library. This is like your brain. Your brain is an amazing resource full of experiences, knowledge, expertise, unique information that you have amassed. And so what this is about, the reason why expertise is a key component of gravitas is it's the evidence that people will use to rate you. And it's also the value that you bring during change and how you're different from other people. So getting really, really clear on what your expertise is, what you know, what experiences that you've had that are different from others, how they're relevant to the right now, but also crucially, because you could be the most amazing project manager, you could be the most amazing organizational development expert, you could be the most fantastic MD, graduate training, whatever level, whatever you do, you could be just incredible. But unless people know about that, unless people are able to appreciate what you bring, unless you're able to express it in such a way that it makes sense and resonates with the audiences that you need to be in front of, then actually you may as well not bother. And so expertise is not only about the expertise that you have, but also your ability to express it. The third component of the Gravitas wheel, the third internal component here, is authenticity. And authenticity is a very overused word, you know, where there's authentic holidays and authentic leadership programs, and then there's, you know, authentic relationships, and it's quite a hackneyed word, but it's very important for us to be able to bring our authentic self to work and to the environments that we're in, particularly actually during change. If you think about the most compelling, the most trustworthy leaders that you have seen communicating over these past 18 months, they will have been the people who have been honest, transparent, shown up as themselves, and chosen to be authentic. But it can be quite challenging to be authentic, because often what happens, and I've seen this many, many times, people join an organization and they think, well, what do I need to do to develop? Well, I need to be like that person. And so they start emulating a different person, and they lose sight of who they actually are, who their authentic self is, and the value of that. And so authenticity is about it's linked to self-awareness, knowing the value you bring, understanding the values that you hold true, being consistent to that, but also not feeling like you need to stay still. Authenticity is continually evolving. Like I said before, we're not the same people as we were not that long ago because of the way that we've been reacting to change. And so here's the challenge is when you're wanting to develop, you put yourself out of your comfort zone, you might find that you're feeling completely inauthentic and out of your comfort zone. So you might feel like it's much more comfortable to just stay where you are. But the thing is evolution and change and development is all around progression and putting yourself into uncomfortable situations, which is why it's important to become comfortable with that sense of evolution and actually comfortable with the imposter syndrome that goes with that. I use the term managed authenticity when I'm talking about how leaders and individuals within organizations need to communicate to get heard. And so you might think, well, what does that actually mean? That sounds like a bit of a contradiction in terms. Managed authenticity essentially is about how you can flex your communication style, how you can adapt how you communicate depending on the person that you're in front of and the situation that you are in. And so to give you an example, I'm being authentic right now with you. I've chosen to show up and be honest with exactly what's happening and where I am, and be true to my values. And so I'm being authentically myself with you right now. Later on, when I'm cooking dinner and talking to my daughter about her first day back at school and how she's going to get on with her final year of A-levels, etc., I will also be being authentic, but I'll be communicating in a very different way. And so managed authenticity is about understanding what people need you to be, and then knowing how to adapt your communication style to suit that. So we've been through the first three components of the Gravitas wheel: self-awareness, expertise, and authenticity, and talked about how important those qualities are during times of change and how you can develop them. I'm now going to hand over to Sarah, we're going to have a short break in terms of my content. Sarah's going to take us through any questions that have come in.
Thank you, Antoinette. We've got a few questions coming through on the chat for you. So the first question is from Sue Can, and they're asking, how do you authentically deliver gravitas in your communication?
Great question. And as I was saying before, authenticity, there's that managed authenticity about being able to adapt and flex and tailor your communication style depending on the situation that you're in and the people that you're talking to. That doesn't mean that you're being inauthentic. It just means that you're being flexible. And then, so the other part of it was around how to deliver gravitas in the communication authentically. And so I would encourage people to spend time understanding who they are, building their self-awareness, understanding what their values are, and choosing to include that in their communication. And one of the easiest ways of doing that is identifying stories that are going to resonate with the person that you're talking to, your own stories, your own experiences of what's been happening, and weaving those in as examples when you're communicating your message. So to give an example around a leader or an individual who might be talking to their team about change, they could, on the one hand, just talk about, these are the changes, this is what's happening, this is what's expected of you, go forth and make it happen. That's going to be very dry and quite inauthentic. Whereas if the individual weaves in their experience of, how they've come to that change, how they are personally going to be applying it, what they've done in the past in a similar situation, that's going to make the communication much more compelling and much more authentic.
Our next question is from Andy Paulson. He's asking, is it too late to assume gravitas within your business when perceptions of you are that you don't have it?
And that can be quite a harsh thing to be on the receiving end. And I think that, the bigger question is, how can people get better at delivering feedback? Because I've worked with many people who've been told, you need to work on your gravitas, or you need to be more confident, or you need to be more assertive, or, you need to have more impact. And so the challenge is, and the frustration is that people, they get told that they're missing something, but they don't get told how to go about developing it. But back to Andy's question there around the perception that you don't have it. And so, of course, that's going to need to bring about some quite radical change. If that is the case, what I would recommend is to go back to the individuals who provided that feedback and understand specifically what it is that they're talking about, to ask for some specific examples of what that individual might be doing or not doing that isn't conveying gravitas, because then that gives you some really valuable data that you can then go away and work on. So I think it's about kind of understanding where that comment comes from and then taking steps to overcome it. In working with the gravitas wheel, I believe anyone can develop gravitas, anyone can accelerate it. And in working through the wheel and understanding where your key strengths are, firstly, and building out from there, then you will absolutely be able to grow and develop and enhance your gravitas.
Our next question is from Tony Jarvis. How does leading with gravitas translate with a diverse range of generations in the workplace at one time, for example, Gen Z, Gen Y, and Gen X?
And I think that there's a really interesting question there from a diversity and inclusion perspective around how we can honor and value and appreciate everyone within an organization. And I've been using the word leader. And leader, from my perspective, is not just about the hierarchy and the title that you have. We are all leaders, whatever level we're at. We're all leading ourselves and we're all leading our careers. And so my recommendation would be to create a culture that values the perspective that everyone brings. And if you think about change, so much of it is around digital. So much of it is around how do you be really savvy with that. And of course, the people who are at the start of their careers are the people who have the greatest finesse with that. And so it's about how do we appreciate the value that everyone brings from an inclusive perspective. And believing, because the old perception was that to have gravitas, you would need to have had a whole career and kind of got to the point where you're the most senior and you've got your own parking space in the car. It's not like that anymore. So everyone can develop gravitas at any level, and everyone has it already. Our
last question before we go back to your content is from Louise Harford. She's asking for top tips for staying motivated and focused when it's really all getting on top of you.
Well, look, Louise, I'm sorry that that's the case, or if you're wanting to pass that on to individuals who are in that place. I think, like I was saying at the beginning around the personal impact of those forces that are spinning the world at a greater speed than ever before. You know, one of the biggest impacts has been around overwhelm and stress, and so there's the mental health question there, I think, that we all need to be very, very, very mindful of. I think if you at an individual level are feeling like it's all getting too much for you, or you're losing your mojo, or you're not feeling it anymore, then I would go back to the self-awareness and think about, right, well, what am I brilliant at? Have a conversation with someone who you trust. Go back to what you love, and then question whether where you are is ticking those boxes or not. And if not, think about, well, what choices are ahead of you? Because we always have a choice if we choose to believe that that's the case. Right, I'm going to head back to the content now to allow sufficient time for a few more questions at the end. And then just to reiterate, if we don't cover all the questions, or if people want to pick up with me individually, then please connect with me on LinkedIn, and I'm really happy to have a conversation with you there. And so we've been through the three internal components of the Gravitas wheel. We're now going to look at the three external components of the Gravitas wheel, which, if you remember, are presence, connection, and projection. So presence right here, I use the analogy of a flame. Sometimes you're going to want to have a massive presence. You're going to be really noticed, and you're going to need to be able to have a really prominent impact, to get your voice heard, to stand out from all the other people who are communicating and speaking. And so sometimes you really need to be able to turn up that gas. Other times, actually, we might want to turn our flame down if we want to give other people the limelight, if we want to give other people space, or if we want to be in a listening state, then we're going to want to really turn down that flame of our presence. But what is presence? Well, presence is a combination of two things. Presence, firstly, is about being present. And, that might sound easy, but it's the biggest challenge in the world. I was coaching someone the other day, and she said, well, I suggested to my team the other day that we would actually get together in person and have a team meeting, and so we can all kind of get to know one another and spend some time together after all this time apart. And one of the people in her team piped up and said, well, do you know what? I'd rather just do it virtually, because if I come and meet you face to face, then I won't be able to multitask at the same time. And that kind of made me realize we've all become so used to trying to kind of do 400 things at the same time. So take part in this webinar, maybe checking emails at the same time, thinking about what we're going to cook for dinner tonight, sorting out, having lunch, whatever. We become so used to multitasking that actually it's affecting our ability to just focus and be present. And so my invitation to you is to make the decision to be present in those situations which are going to be worthy of that, and be there, pay attention, show up, and have presence, because it pays dividends. If you're present and you're listening to what's going on, you're part of the conversation, it makes it much easier for you to inject and share your thoughts and your feelings and get your voice heard than if part of your brain is occupied with something else. So presence also, though, is a choice. And if you have a look at this table here, you'll see that a lot of this it's down to you. Are you, for that call, for that meeting, for that presentation, are you going to allow yourself to be distracted, or are you going to decide to be focused? In terms of your body language, again, are you going to fold yourself in, close yourself off, or are you going to choose to open up? Are you going to choose to appear relaxed, or are you going to turn away from the camera? Or are you going to switch your camera off altogether? All of this is a choice. What do you do with your voice? If you have, and we've all heard it, if you're listening to someone and they've got a really monotone voice and they're just talking, maybe their voice just tails off and it's flat, or they're really kind of speeding up and they're shrill and that is not going to give someone presence. So there's work that we can all do to enhance the beauty of our voice. Eye contact, absolutely key. Look down the lens, you'll have had this before. Image, again, I'm not going to prescribe, but how you show up in terms of what you wear, what your background looks like, all of this will contribute to how people see you. And so presence during change is important. We need our people to be there. We need to be able to show up. On to connection here. And for those of you who are completing your Gravitas wheel, don't forget to mark up a scale of 1 to 10 where you see yourself against each of these different components. So connection here, this is what counters that old-fashioned perception of what Gravitas is. People with Gravitas back in the day were viewed as quite aloof, quite from on high, quite closed off perhaps, quite hierarchical, and that kind of leadership simply doesn't work anymore. And so connection is what brings warmth. So this is about two things. Firstly, knowing and prioritizing growing your network and building relationships beyond the people who you know already. So when it comes to change, if you're wanting to evolve yourself personally or build your team or progress within your organization, then ultimately it's about who you're going to know. So it's about prioritizing growing your network and doing it strategically. It's also about being able to forge those meaningful relationships. So build rapport, know how to communicate, get brilliant at asking fantastic questions, really pay attention to people when they're speaking. So listen intently so that you can then respond. So connection is a key part of Gravitas, and it's tiring, and it takes time. And so it's about making the decision to do so. Finally, the last element of the Gravitas wheel is projection. And this is our ability to really amplify our message, really turn up the volume, maximize our impact. And so you need projection when you're speaking to the largest audiences in the room. You need to be able to speak to the people who are sitting at the back just as much as the people who are sitting at the front. Equally, in a large webinar like this, if I were standing at the other end of my office and whispering to you, you would not have stayed connected with me for the duration. And so we have to learn how to project and throw our voice and really maximize and amplify our impact. Projection is also valuable during those situations where we need to be courageous. Maybe it's a difficult or a challenging conversation and you really want to make your voice heard and interject. That's when we need to learn how to project and be able to speak up. So those are the 6 components of the Gravitas wheel. And I've talked about how you can develop them for yourself and also what you can do as part of the changing environment that we're in to use your Gravitas to grow and develop. I would encourage you to, again, look at what is your wheel telling you. Are you stronger on one side than on the other? Where are your greatest strengths? And how are they relevant to the changes that you're going through? I want to finish with some top tips around how to communicate through change before I hand back to Sarah for the final rounds of questions. And as I say, communicating through change is the focus of the final chapter of Leading with Gravitas. And it's very practical. So here are some top tips. Firstly, it's worth bearing in mind that the people around you, whether it's organizational change, team change, personal change, we are all having multiple experiences of change at the same time. And so you'll all be aware of the change curve. If you're not, there's a lot more information in the book about the change curve and how to communicate with people at different stages. But you may have got your head around the organizational changes that are going ahead in your organization. So you might be towards the accepting stage of the change curve when it comes to what's happening in your organization. However, you personally might be going through another change. So you might be in a situation where you're moving house, or maybe, things are changing for you personally. So you might be at the beginning stage of that. And so we are all having different experiences of change all the time. Also, just because if you're communicating, say, something about the changes that are going on in the environment at work for you, just because you're at some point in the change curve, maybe you've accepted it, you've understood it, you've thought about it, you've wrapped your head around it. Not everyone is going to be in the same place as you. And so communicating through change is very much about meeting people where they are, understanding and being empathetic, using your emotional intelligence to appreciate how they're feeling and taking the time to be with them through that, because you can't force people to accept things until they're ready to. The other invaluable point, which I've certainly learned and really focused on sharing with people through these challenging few months, has been that how we respond to change is absolutely down to us. And we do have a choice in terms of how we react to situations. And so we can frame situations like, the last 16 months, the last 18 months have been horrific. It's been terrible. The changes that are upcoming in the organization are really frightening and challenging, and people are overwhelmed. We can frame it like that, or we can reframe it into a more conducive, positive way, whilst accepting people where they are. And so you can ask questions like, how can we best interpret the situation that we've been through in the best possible way? How can we best look upon it? What have we learned as a result of it? And what will we do now to make the most of the situation that we're in? Embrace and welcome it. So when it comes to communication, think about the vision, the purpose. Where are we going rather than where have we come from? When it comes to communication, what we need is we need real clarity. We need to be really specific. And when I worked in comms, we used to say a message needs to be communicated 7 times through 7 different sources for us to be able to act. And so you need to not only be clear, but you need to be consistent and communicate those messages on an ongoing basis. The third part of it is around transparency and honesty. And people will accept if there are things that they can't know at a certain stage. What they don't accept and find difficult to trust is if they feel like something's been held back from them and they don't really know why. And so you may know that if you're leading through change, you may know that you need to get to the end of a project before you communicate something that is going to affect your team. You might be in that difficult position. But it's about what can you communicate, what can you give people certainty on, and how can you be transparent through that. And people are okay if they know that there are things that they can't know yet, as long as it's communicated appropriately. The final piece around communicating through change is back to that word vision, inspiring a shared vision, and as part of the 5 practices of exemplary leadership as identified by Kouzes and Posner. So one of the key elements there is around inspiring a shared vision. And we're in a fascinating time in that whoever we are, wherever we're from, whatever country we live in, whatever our background, we all have one thing in common, in that we have all lived through this crazy time. We have all been on the receiving end of change. We've been reacting to it, we've been forging it, and we've been reacting to it as well. And so ultimately it's about, well, how can we all learn from this situation, and how can we all work together to make the most of this situation that we're in right now? And if you're able to do all of these things, then you certainly, whatever your level, will be leading with Gravitas. So I'm going to head back to Sarah for any more questions that have come through. And then I'm going to share at the end a final offer for CMI members for the book. So over to you, Sarah.
All right, so we have a question from Matthew Colley. He's asking, when you're passing an instruction to someone and it's clear they aren't picking up the importance of a point, how do you reinforce the important point without just repeating yourself and looking pedantic?
Yeah, well, it's the definition of madness, isn't it? Doing the same thing over and over and again and expecting a different result. So it goes back to that flexibility and the managed authenticity that I was talking about before. And so I would encourage you to spend some time observing the person that you're talking to. Maybe ask some questions around how they are experiencing and how they're viewing the situation that you're talking about. Listen to their language. Try and look at the situation from their perspective. Put yourself in their shoes. That will give you a completely different insight in terms of how they see things, which will then mean that, again, you've got data to then be able to change your messaging, change the way that you're communicating the point in such a way that it's going to be more likely to land with them.
Dawn Sillett would like to know any tips that you might have for preparing for speaking to larger meetings, for example, 20 plus people.
Yeah, so really happy to pick up with you on that separately, Dawn. Top tip, I mean, it's around projection. And so it's around how you can amplify your message. And so whether you're talking virtually through a 2D screen or whether you're in person, it's about how do you increase the volume of your voice. You can do work around how you can throw your voice, but also how can you exaggerate and build your gestures. And so you might, for example, be talking about, a change in awareness in terms of a particular audience. So you can use gestures to help you illustrate that. You can say, so at the beginning, our awareness of our product was very, very low. So you can use your gesture to show that. And then you can say, right, by the end, it had increased by 80%. And so you can use your hands, you can use your voice, you can use your word choice to ensure that you're involving everyone. But ultimately, irrespective of size of audience, it's about thinking, well, what's going to resonate with them most? What do they need to know? What situation are they in? And then designing your talk in accordance with that. Rather than thinking about what you want to tell them, think about what they want to know from you and start from there.
Seema would like to know how to deal with conflict assertively while not getting involved personally.
And so dealing with conflict assertively is about assertive communication. Ultimately, if you look at the mindset of how can we both win through this, how are we both equal partners in this situation? What do I need? What do they need? What am I prepared to concede on, perhaps, and what might they concede on? And so again, it goes back to if you put yourself in their shoes, it will give you a much greater insight around where they're coming from. And if you then go into the situation thinking, well, how can we all win through this? How can we work together to ensure that everyone gets what they need? Then it changes what you might perceive to be a conflict. Again, it's about reframing into an opportunity for everyone to grow and develop and get what they need. Assertive communication as well, though, is so there's the preparation in advance. But if you're wanting to communicate assertively, you can think about how you're going to use your body language, your voice, your word choice to be that way. And so the opposite of it might be is if you're kind of saying, I'm not quite sure, and I think, and maybe, if you haven't done enough prep, you're going to hold yourself in, your presence is going to get diminished. You won't be able to be assertive. And so assertive communication, again, it's back to you've got open body language, you're looking people straight in the eye, you're being fair, you're not being arrogant, but you're really stepping into your power through using the physiology that you have to communicate your messages.
Shirag is asking, is there such a thing as digital bias proximity? For example, regularity of instant messages can also be deemed as being present, especially with teams still fully remote.
That's a really, really good point and a good question. And yes, I think that there is. And if you're noticing that that's the case, then yeah, it is in the environment that you're in. And so therefore, what do you do about that? One of the pieces of advice that I give to teams is to talk about it first. Talk about how can we all ensure that we are all getting an equal experience. You know, there's that real equity. But if you want to take it a step further, one of the things I recommend is in a meeting or in a brainstorm, in a situation where people are coming together, is to identify a shared voice ambassador. So it's that person's job to make sure that everyone is heard. And it's not just the kind of the loudest voices who dominate, everyone, because the belief behind it is everyone has a valuable contribution to make. So yeah, I would encourage you to start by having the conversation and then think about what behaviors can you put in place to mitigate that.
Our last question today is from Molly, and she's asking, how do you overcome hierarchical structural systems to lead with gravitas?
It's interesting, isn't it? Because, you know, some organizations are a lot more hierarchical than others. And then other organizations will say, you know, we have a very flat structure, but ultimately there's still a hierarchy. And so I think it's about reframing and looking at how you can create an environment. You know, start with the environment that you're in and creating an environment where you can ensure that everyone is valued for the perspective they bring. And I think it's a question. It's an invaluable question to ask. Whether you're having the conversation with HR, whether you're having the conversations with leaders, whether you're bringing the conversations to your team meetings. You know, how can we make sure that we can all fulfill our potential irrespective of level, and start the conversation. And my final thought there is that if you find yourself in an environment where you don't feel like you're being valued and you're not able to do your best work, then goes back to think about, well, what value do you have? You know, what strengths do you have? What are you most interested and passionate about? I imagine that every single person who is on this call has a huge wealth of value to bring. So if you're not happy in the environment that you're in, we're at a time of change. Look at what you can do to change it. I'd like to finish with an offer for CMI members. If you're interested in getting hold of my book, Leading with Gravitas, I'm offering everyone a 20% discount. If you go onto my website and there's a page that's all about Leading with Gravitas, if you put the code L and lowercase WG into that, you'll get a 20% discount. And as I say, there's a whole chapter on leading through change, and it's absolutely peppered with practical examples around how you can communicate both remotely and in person.
That's amazing. Thanks, Antoinette. Well, that's all we have time for, I think, today. Thank you to everyone who joined us, but a big, big thank you to Antoinette for your insights and expertise.
Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you. So yes, that is it for today's session. Thank you, Sarah and Antoinette. If you are a member of CMI, you can log into Management Direct using the link in the live chat, and you can find a wide range of exclusive and practical development resources and much more. If you're not yet a member, you can join the CMI community via the link that's also in the live chat to gain full access to our Management Direct portal. You can also sign up to the free CMI newsletter for the latest trends and tips for managers and leaders. Please do take a few moments to let us know your thoughts on today's event by completing the evaluation form. The link is in the live chat there for you. And thank you again for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your day.